Can we start? Yeah. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to moderate this panel discussion on the future of the WTO program. Normally, I don't act as a master of ceremony, but this occasion is really special, and I will do my best to make a good job of it. In my position as a Confindustria Vice President for International Affairs, I have to deal with the multilateral trade-related issues. Moreover, chairing the B20 Italy Task Force on Trade and Investment, I have gathered a huge amount of input from our members. And one appeal demand stands out from all the rest: the need to effectively reestablish the WTO of the core of the multilateral trading system. Hence, discussing future work program will be a great interest. I'm sure both panelists and participants will considerably enrich our understanding. We have already come a long way since the June of the WTO trade dialogues with business, and we are heading toward the 12th Ministerial Conference, a milestone in WTO history. All the points of our path are linked by a fil rouge. All our steps will lead to a set of proposals to be conveyed to the Ministerial Conference. We have the great pleasure to have with us today the WTO Director General, Dr. Ngozzi. Hello. Who I warmly thank for her outstanding commitment. In a few months, she has powerfully reaffirmed the legitimacy of the organization. I have no doubt she will accomplish her mission for revamping the role of the WTO in the multilateral paradigm. Let me thank her for the precision interest with our B20. Emma Marcegaglia, B20 Chair and CEO of Marcegaglia Holding, past President of Confindustria of Business Europe and of Eni, the major Italian oil and gas company, who has led Italy B20 around, setting a benchmark for years to come. Hello, Emma. Sinta Kandami, CEO of Sinta Group, who will soon receive the handover from Emma to chair the forthcoming B20 Indonesia 2022, and who has co-chaired with me the B20 Task Force on Trade and Investment. I think she's on video. John Denton, Secretary General of the ICC, a long-standing and unquestioned support of the WTO, and an excellent professional partner of the B20, who has co-chaired our B20 Task Force on Finance and Infrastructure. Hello, John. I'm very nice to meet you in person. That is my first time. Let me now give you a few elements for our discussion. After Dr. Ngozzi welcome, I will open the panel discussion to optimize our time. I will not comment on the panelists' remark. Right after, we will have a Q&A session. The panel will last 1 hour sharp, so we may not be able to take all questions. I will try to organize and group them up to ensure a sound interaction. At the end of the Q&A session, Dr. Ngozzi will share with us her final comments. In conclusion, I will briefly sum up the main contents emerged. Please use the Q&A function in your dashboard. I kindly ask you to be sharp and concise, to put forward questions rather than consideration, and where possible, to specify to whom you address your remarks. So thank you very much. Dr. Ngozzi, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Barbara, for those words and the generous introduction. And welcome to everyone to the WTO Public Forum. I would also want to express sincere thanks to John, Emma, and Shinta. It's wonderful to see you. I've seen John in person a few times, but thank you for coming. I recall the very, very interesting conversations we had in Rome and the session with you. I sometimes grumble that the private sector speaks too softly when it comes to expressing support to the WTO, but I can't say that of all of you. You have been very vocal, and I want to thank you for it. I hope we will hear your voices loud and clear today also. I'm grateful for your consistent engagement with the WTO and for your work on the importance of reforming and reinvigorating the institution to bring it back to the center of global economic governance. In that, we have a complete meeting of minds with the objectives with which I came to this organization. It's always positive to hear ideas about how the WTO can be improved to adapt to changing economic and environmental realities. It is in this regard that I want to thank ICC for the paper it has put together on business priorities for WTO reform. What I appreciate the most is that not only do we have this paper, but we've also had the opportunity to exchange on it, and to trade ideas on some of the issues. As you know, some of the issues you point to are currently the subject of heated negotiations among members. Others are newer to the WTO, are not yet on the table here. Whatever your views on each priority, the paper is a rich and detailed contribution to the debate. I'm glad the ICC and B20 are using this public forum to reach out to members and other stakeholders. You have, of course, been regularly engaged with the WTO community through the Trade Dialogues Initiative and have put forward ideas that have already informed the debate of our members here in Geneva. Business has a stake in the WTO. The system continues to provide stability and predictability to your operations. It keeps tariff and non-tariff barriers in check and offers avenues to address discrimination against your exports. But we need to ensure that the WTO remains fit for purpose. For that, we need an updated rule book, including for the digital economy. A fully functioning dispute settlement system is imperative, and a closer look at how trade can be more sustainable and more inclusive. I look forward to hearing your exchanges on what you hope to see from MC12 and future work programs. My message to you is straightforward. We need concrete results at MC12. I will never back off from saying that. That is necessary to show that the WTO is back on track and that it can deliver for members and people relying on trade to drive a strong economic recovery. Trade must be part of the economic recovery from this pandemic. It can and should be. The support of the business community and your active engagement with your governments and in the media will be crucial to make results at MC12 possible. I've been saying that members should pragmatically focus on delivering meaningful results in 2 or 3 areas. These could include, first, a response to the pandemic. WTO members have an opportunity to shape the trading system's response to this and future crises. They can act to ensure that key products will move freely across borders, that access to vaccines and other medical technologies will be equitable, and that we continue to get the innovation we need. Second, an agreement on ending harmful fisheries subsidies would contribute to the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of fisher women and men who rely on this for a living. It would improve ocean health and contribute to achieving one of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 14.6, whilst bolstering long-term food and livelihood security in coastal communities. As your paper recognizes, John, a fisheries agreement after 21 years, not 20, we are now adding another one, is a credibility test for the WTO. Concluding these negotiations will demonstrate that WTO members can still negotiate multilateral agreements. Third, agriculture. As you know, this is never an easy topic at the WTO, but members are working towards some outcomes at MC12, along with time-bound work programs for future negotiations. Dispute settlement is also politically sensitive, but I'm hopeful that members can at least reach a shared understanding about the kinds of reforms they want to see and the process for moving the work forward on this. And that could guide the future reforms of that particular aspect of our work. In addition, groups of members have been taking forward plurilateral negotiations on a variety of issues directly relevant to the cross-border operation of businesses like yours. These include domestic regulation in services, where an agreement would make services trade more predictable and less burdensome to providers. And I would like to say that the outcomes on this are looking very promising. There are ongoing talks on e-commerce, investment facilitation, enhancing opportunities for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in international trade, and using trade to empower women economically. Some newer plurilateral initiatives are seeking to improve trade's contribution to environmental sustainability, looking at issues such as the liberalization of trade in environmental goods and services, fossil fuel subsidy reform, moving to circular economy, reducing plastics pollution, and fostering sustainable supply chains. These are all areas you've expressed interest in seeing addressed in the WTO. I would encourage you to push this agenda forward while also ensuring support for a just transition in developing countries. All of these discussions need your support. We're 2 months away from MC12. I encourage you and your constituencies to talk to your governments. Support them to be ready to negotiate, and even more importantly, ready to compromise in favor of a revitalized and reinvigorated WTO. Thank you for your concrete suggestions on some of the things you would like us to do, like a business advisory group, CSO advisory group. We're very much of the same mind, and I hope we can make it happen. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG, for your welcoming words. Now we move to the panel discussion. Let me listen to the B20 deliverables. Emma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. So dear Dr. Gnozzi, dear Barbara, Shinta, and John, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me say that I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation and to attend in person this 2021 WTO Public Forum. This is my first time personally here, so I'm really honored to be here. I would like to warmly thank Dr. Gnozzi for the opportunity to share the business view in such a prominent context. And this panel discussion is a part of a process, as you said, initiated on the 23rd of June with the WTO trade dialogue. So that was really very interesting, where we share together with ICC, of course, we start collecting the suggestion from our prominent business representatives. And today, as you said, we will focus on the most urgent action and decision to be brought to the attention of the 12th Ministerial Conference. So first of all, let me say something very clearly, also echoing what Dr. Gnozzi said. In our B20 work, the free trade, good trade, and the strong reform of the WTO to have a WTO being fit for what is needed in the next decades is one, I would say, probably the key arguments that we have on the table. This is very clear. Barbara has chaired very well our trade and investment task force. This argument was very important, but trade and the reform of WTO is central also in the works of all the other task forces, talking about energy, talking about digital, talking about health. So what I want to tell you very clearly that for the B20 community, this is a key point. And what we are doing, and I also want to tell you this, Dr. Gnozzi, of course, we made a lot of advocacy with our ministers, because the first thing is also to convey our recommendation to the Italian minister that we represent, for the different subject, the G20, but also we organize more than 10 B20 dialogue with the most important federation of industry all over the world, from Japan to Turkey to China to the European one, everywhere. And always we talk about reform of the WTO, always we talk about trade, always we talk about access to vaccination, always we talk about the role of WTO also in sustainability, in inclusion. So what I want to assure you is that for us, this is absolutely a key subject, a key issue, and be assured that our voice also next week when we will have the final summit, and thank you very much for taking part of that, of the B20, our voice on this will be very strong. We will ask all the different ministers, we will ask all the different prime minister of the G20 countries not to be shy, not to say maybe when they are in a situation like this that they are supporting the WTO reforms, but then when they are at the table, when you really have to negotiate and be ready also to make, of course, a compromise, they will be too shy. So we will say this very clear. Now, I want to tell you this as a premises because we think that in a moment like this, where of course we are seeing some recovery in the global growth, trade is absolutely important. Without a strong trade, without a strong WTO, we will not achieve what we want, a long-term growth, more sustainable, more inclusive for the next decade. So we think this is key, as I said before, not only for trade and for growth, but for inclusiveness, for energy, for fighting climate change, for the digital development. So this is very clear to us. So I just want to tell you this, that we will not be shy. We will speak up very strongly on this, and we will not accept any situation where you see different approaches formally and then different in a practical way. So having said that, I wanted to tell you what are for us the most important points. First of all, we think, as you said, the factual work program will restore confidence in the organization and strengthen its ability to address fundamental flows such as trade monitoring, rulemaking, and dispute resolution. So the first point for us is probably the immediate priority is to fill the vacant appellate body and allow the WTO member to once again benefit from a trusted mechanism to solve litigation. This is key. I heard your words saying that you see some possible progress. You see at least the willingness to understand what will be the process of reform. But here, honestly, I don't understand why we are still waiting for this appellate body. So this will be a very important point. And so this is our first priority. Then we think another very important point that can empower him in the WTO is a stronger notification and monitoring system, because when you have this kind of stronger notification and monitoring system, probably this will also deflect pressure from the dispute settlement. I think it's better for this kind of organization to have to get to a dispute settlement only as an extreme, let's say, instrument. But normally, if you have a better instrument, this will be better. So we ask for stronger notification and monitoring system. Furthermore, negotiation would greatly benefit from a more precise and effective special and differential treatment for developing countries. Considering the different level of development, the WTO should set a roadmap to help members that are still in need to improve the implementation capacity. So also this could really help to have a smoother way of working. Third point, even though, as you said, we prefer, of course, a multilateral approach in the negotiation, we think that on some specific points, also plurilateral negotiation and joint initiative could be strong and valuable. And as you said, in the negotiation on trade and else, on domestic service, where you said that you see some progress as well, and on e-commerce are excellent examples. So we will support this plurilateral negotiation on this specific point. Then we think that another very important point is that we should address key competitive dynamics in the marketplace by reviewing the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measure that dates back to a world that is not longer the same. So as you said, WTO has to be fit for the next problem. And then expanding the participation to the agreement on public procurement is a further priority, especially now that the huge financial resources are flowing through the recovery plans adopted, not only in Europe, of course, but all over the world. And then, as you said, we think WTO must have a key role also when we talk about sustainability and climate. I think this is really key. This is one of the most important roles that, let's say, the future WTO should have. And so I think that everything that is linked to accelerating the deployment of technologies, goods, services necessary to net zero race is absolutely key. And finally, of course, two very important points. One, as you said, is the conclusion of the negotiation on fisheries subsidy. This should be very important, and we really hope and expect and support that we can achieve an agreement. And of course, when we talk about response to pandemic, this has to be key. And so everything that can accelerate the vaccination, that can accelerate, of course, to have zero barriers on vaccine, on medicine, this is very important. And I want to assure you that also the Italian G20, and of course also us as B20, will put a lot of effort on this point, because we think this is very important. So to conclude, our work as B20 will be strongly, as I said, focused on that. We believe that trade is really key to go back to a level of growth, which is what we want to see in the next future, and the different growth, more sustainable and more inclusive. And so we will work with you and our friend, with John and the ICC, really to make of the ministerial conference, the 12th ministerial conference, a real success. I think we all need to have good results there, and we are with you, and we will strongly support you in your incredible effort to change the WTO and to make real progress, saying clearly what we expect from the Prime Minister and the Minister of Trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Now let's move to John Danton. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And again, it's great to be here in the revitalized WTO under the leadership of Dr. Ngozi. I'm always amazed at how quickly she moves. I always check her feet to see if she's wearing runners or not, but she's moving very quickly. And there is no doubt that Dr. Ngozi has dealt the WTO back into the global game. There is absolutely no doubt from the position of the ICC, and we welcome that, because we believe a strong WTO, a functioning WTO, is actually good for growing the global economy and enabling business to do what it does best, which is enabling business to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. Emma, it's so fantastic to spend time with you again. The work of Italy, not just the G20, but in particular on the B20, has really struck us at ICC. First of all, the inclusive nature of the engagement has been quite terrific. I have to say that I gave a commitment at ICC that I would never, ever appear on a mantle. Well, can I tell you, friends, that today the opportunity is actually legend for me to take back to my team at ICC headquarters and globally to show the power of inclusiveness. So again, thank you very much. And Barbara, working with you as our chair on trade and investment, I've actually been privileged to co-chair the finance and infrastructure group at the B20. I'm an infrastructure investor as well. And one thing we've been doing is making the world more investable for infrastructure, without which you will not be able to get some of the opportunities to the people in places like Africa, Latin America, in Asia, etc. So creating an environment where that is possible is absolutely critical from our point of view. So we thank you for having particular focus on that. It's always great to be in the building of the WTO. The reason I say that is that I compare the building of the WTO to the building of UNHCR. And I look at the building of UNHCR, and I often think to myself, if only we had the same level of wealth and opportunity applying to the global challenges of refugees as we have to the WTO, imagine what we could do. And the reason I say that, when you think about the strength, the power, the political credibility this organization once had, what it could have achieved, if only it was ensured that it was relevant to the global world and actually functioned that way, which is why, Dr. Ngozi, your contribution and your leadership is so welcome. This building holds within it the seeds of the answers to a lot of the global challenges we have. From the ICC's perspective, as I said, we enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. We do that by working to grow the economy, revitalize trade, advance sustainability. And when we look at the WTO, we think you are critical to actually achieving all those three baskets for us of what we need to do. And we do stuff ourselves as well. So this morning I've been launching, and I really appreciate the fact that you paid reference to this, Dr. Ngozi, and also just working with the B20, the ICC program for reform of the WTO. It's not just another paper, and I know there's been lots of papers issued out. For us, it's around the 5 fundamental themes that need to be joined up to enable a functioning WTO. And I think there is a timeline on this. If we don't show credibility in this organization at MC12, which is fast looming on the horizon, then the risk is the WTO will be dealt out again of some of the big global challenges that need to be grappled with. And we want a strong WTO. We want the influence of the WTO in shaping that, because a strong and equitable trading environment globally is so important to us. So we look at reform in 5 baskets, classic kind of way of thinking things through, enough that we can remember them on one hand, but not too many that we get confused talking about them. So when we think about reform, and obviously as Emma and Dr. Ngozi have said, we actually do have to fix up a bunch of the stuff that makes this organization unable to function properly. And some of it is as simple as improving the notifications system. If you think about it, the failure to have a properly functioning notification system hurt this organization play a significant role in the COVID pandemic crisis, which, by the way, many of us know continues. The inability to actually know where there was actually prohibitions put on the movement of goods and services that support access to prophylactics, access to the pharma products that are necessary, access to getting goods across border. This was actually a real problem. A properly functioning notification system could have actually helped in this. And obviously we think that reforming and enabling the appellate process to operate is critical. But I also am not living in a la-la land here. I know there are fundamental reasons why that is easier said than done. And the reason it's easier said than done, because without fixing things like the underlying systemic challenges to this organization, this issue with the appellate process and its appropriate allocation to itself of a jurisdiction will continue. Because if the WTO membership can't fix their disputes, they'll keep on kicking them up the road to the appellate process and undermining, in a sense, its actual judicial authority and its legitimacy. So we need, if we're serious about this, to actually grapple with this issue. The next issue, and I touched on that a little bit in my first comments around, even around notifications. The WTO actually had a role to play in working through the COVID process. There is no doubt in my mind, and I say this boldly now, and I apologize if it's a little too frank, I actually think the WTO was missing during the COVID crisis. And let's not forget, the COVID crisis is not a rolling kind of systematic or sequential crisis. It goes and it comes back, and it goes and it comes back. It overwhelms, and then it's in another area, etc. So there is still time for the WTO to play a role here. What we have suggested at the ICC is that what the world needs in order to ensure equitable access to vaccines is not a debate around that. We need to increase production. And we need to increase not just production, but access to those vaccines and ensure they're distributed properly. Increasing production will require access. Increasing and improving the supply of the access to the vaccines and the products and the prophylactics that support it will require functioning supply chains. You need supply chains to actually improve the capacity to access these services and the products required to build or create the actual cook or bake the vaccines, and you need supply chains effectively functioning to distribute them. We actually think without increasing that production, without those two elements with it, we will not be able to actually have equitable access to vaccines. And we don't argue for equitable access for vaccines as a good in itself. We argue for it because it's critical to what we do, which is growing the economy. Because if we don't have the world vaccinated, the economy will suffer a $9.2 trillion loss. And we have shown that, we have proved that. We've taken this to G20 finance ministers, WHO ministers, etc. It's in everyone's self-interest, because until the whole world is vaccinated, the risks of interruption to global supply chains, value chains, and our interconnectedness will continue. And so when we're talking about our reform, we actually think it's really important that the WTO stands up and actually takes on responsibility for helping us monitor and ensure access to effective supply chains, which is why we've developed a system which we put forward, which is actually really a health information system, which would actually be a monitoring agency, which would be set up on an interconnected basis with the WTO, the WHO, the WCO. If I put W in front of ICC, we probably have the WICC as well, but we actually need that. And by the way, it's not just for now. If the WTO wants to be relevant to the 21st century, it needs to have a health review mechanism embedded in itself. So the next time this happens, we are not scrambling around with arguments over access to PPEs. We've actually got a process which will, once notified, be able to be rolled out. Frankly, that's what the ICC does. I mean, we're interested in policy. A big shout out to my colleague and friend from ICC France here. Of course, we're interested in ensuring appropriate policy frameworks, but we want standards, but we also want tools. We actually want to get stuff done, which is why it's a delight to actually have the opportunity to try to push a reform agenda, which might just work. And I think by playing in the health space is something that's going to be critical for the WTO. And I think the mechanism we've suggested can actually be very helpful in that regard. And it forms a very important part of the reform program, because we do think for the ICC to be for the WTO to be relevant, as Emma said, it needs to be fit for purpose for the 21st century. What are the issues we've already seen in the 21st century that we need to be able to grapple with them? And one is health. The other is around alignment with climate. You know, I remember when I first was offered or took the leadership of ICC, it was in the 99th year of the history of the ICC. We're moving into our centenary. We took the view, and I took the view that the important role I could play was to ensure that we created a legacy which enabled the ICC to have the same relevance in the 21st century that it had in the 20th century, when we created Incoterms, when we created private arbitration, when we got involved, and even the creation of the United Nations itself. And we identified critical areas. And in a way, I was seeing at the time, I think Emmanuel wasn't with us at the time, but when she joined us, it was like, is he pushing the organization too far? Now I look at it and think, my God, everyone's kind of agreeing with us, because linking up trade and climate was an important part of the declaration of ICC for the 21st century, as was stopping the global rise in inequality, as was creating access to technology for all, as was ensuring action on climate change is everyone's business. And when we say everyone's business, it's also the business of the WTO. This idea that somehow you can bifurcate or trifurcate the debate around climate, the WTO must align its activities to support achievement of Paris. Friends, business wants this because we want to have a planet on which we can have our businesses, which is functioning. So we actually think this is a critical issue for you. We'll be launching a paper at MC12 on things like around the circular economy. There hasn't been enough work done on that, but we're coming up with a fact-based approach to how you can ensure access to a circular economy, what the barriers are, etc. These are practical things that need to be done. We also think there needs to be a discussion about how we can take these debates around Article 6 and the way in which carbon will be priced, and actually ensure that the WTO also has a role there. We actually think there's a big role there, because at the moment, the dysfunctionality we've seen in agreeing on these things is stopping access to the finance, the $10 trillion, which will be critical to actually achieve the outcomes demanded by Paris. And that money will not just come from government, it will come from the private sector, will come through financing, come through the financial markets. We need to actually get that pricing right. And we want the WTO to be part of that story. Because as I said, we want to grow the economy, we want to revitalize trade, we want to advance sustainability. And frankly, we think that's what the WTO should be doing as well. The next area on that is, look, you know, I think Emma's mentioned it, Dr. Ngosi's mentioned it, to think it's 21 years, and the fisheries subsidy agreement has not been resolved. And I just think, you know, I've only been in this game for a couple of years. I've heard prime ministers, I've heard G20, I've heard leaders call for this. I've heard promises that this will be delivered. And that when I come to Geneva, somehow it gets lost in that final trade-off that someone wants for something else. For heaven's sake, if we're going to MC12 and we do not have an agreement on fisheries subsidies resolved by then I think the external world will look at this organization and decry its credibility. I'm not here to ginger you up. I'm not here to exhort you. I'm here to tell you to do what you've been told to do, which is actually reach agreement. Because the idea that somehow the political masters who's subject to the actual votes and determination of their citizens should be undermined by their negotiators is unacceptable in a democratic world. It's actually unacceptable. And the behavior that's being conducted by delegates in this regard reflect an undemocratic and frankly destructive approach to ensuring we have strong multilateralism. So it's something from our perspective that we will be looking at very closely. And we intend to hold people to account on this as well. I hope that sounds sinister because it's actually intended to be as well. The other area I wanted to focus on, if I could, was, when you look at the ICC, we comprise these days more than 48, 50 million businesses globally. Most of those are SMEs and micro SMEs. Most of those, and actually look at the association of the ICC. There was a time when the ICC reflected the Northern Hemisphere. Almost 70% of the ICC sits in developing countries, and I am proud of that. I come from Australia, I come from Asia, I come from the Asia Pacific. I've been involved as leader of the Commonwealth Business Council in Africa, elsewhere over the years, and I am proud of that because I'm proud of being part of the opportunity. But the opportunity is actually around creating entrepreneurialism and actually giving access and enabling SMEs and micro SMEs. That's what we're about at the moment. We're really focused on it. We are the voice of the real economy. And what the real economy wants is a properly functioning global digital platform. What it wants is the ability to use the digital platform to enable SMEs and micro SMEs. And this is how you create jobs. This is how you create opportunity. And we think that this is something that needs to be better understood. The discussion on e-commerce, the discussion on moratorium, on duties on goods, on services that pass over borders or data that pass over borders. These are not abstract issues. These all go to the heart of enabling functioning and creating opportunities for functioning SMEs and micro SMEs in developing countries. And it goes to the heart of winning the argument in industrial countries, particularly with workers who feel that they have been disadvantaged by trade. If we can enable access to advanced manufacturing by access to a functioning digital economy, by access to the skills required to enable that, then we'll be able to provide something in it for them to actually support access and support for WTO and support for multilateral trade agreements again. These are all things that for us are very practical issues. And finally, it's really important, and that's why I'm so pleased to be on this panel, that we're inclusive in the way we go about things. Look, at the ICC, since I've taken over, we've created a whole movement around what's called centers of entrepreneurship. The idea is, how do you create the environment to have an entrepreneurial ecosystem? And we focus very much on developing and least developed countries. We hold workshops. COVID has kind of helped because we're able to do those workshops virtually. Most recently, we held a workshop which Shinta participated, or a team participated in Indonesia, where we have like 300, 400 entrepreneurs, SMEs, etc., in Indonesia coming together about how do we move things forward. But before that, I actually did one in Africa. We did 3 in Africa, one in particular in Nigeria. And we had on the call, again, 300, 400 SMEs. Most of them were female traders. Most of them were actually identifying particular barriers, which frankly are really practical, that most of us had never thought about. The barriers for them trading, which was getting their goods to market, because most of them were in agri. Do you want to know what some of the barriers were? Being raped on the way to actually take their goods to market, being stopped at borders, porous borders, but borders before they crossed over because they were women and actually being sent back, being told that something the regulatory framework they were operating on was actually suddenly changed by a government somewhere. These were all the impediments. And so when we talk about trade and enabling access to women to trade, there's some fundamental issues we need to resolve. And the WTO needs to have a clear eye and a gender lens and the way in which it develops trade policies. This is not an abstract issue, this is real, and this affects people's lives. And this could actually lead to peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all, which is what the ICC is about. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, John, for the point of view ICC. Now I give the floor to Cinta. Hello, Cinta.
Thank you, Barbara, and good morning from New York City. Unfortunately, I
We
can't be
cannot
there
hear
physically
you.
with all of you, but thank you for the opportunity to present some view also on the upcoming WTO Ministerial Conference. I think John has shared many aspects and has taken quite some time. So I would like to perhaps add on and be brief. I think I cannot overemphasize how important the WTO reform for business and how crucial the process and outcome of the MC12 will be for all of us. The call for WTO reform and strengthening the multilateral trading system has been put as the first and foremost agenda in Trade and Investment Task Force that I'm honored to be part of. In the last also 4 or 5 B20 cycles now. And we are happy that the MC12 are finally taking our calls into concrete actions. As you know, Dr. Ngozi, business want a strong, reliable, and efficient multilateral trading system. We want the WTO to support order, discipline, certainty, balance, and efficiency for business to trade across the globe. In order to achieve this, we believe that WTO requires a substantial and structural reform in the following aspects. So I have a few points that I would like to highlight. First is the functionality and efficiency of the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. I think it is obvious that the current impasse has to be addressed urgently. We truly appreciate the effort you've made to unravel and stagnation, as we urgently need a functioning DSB, DSU. But beyond being functional, we hope that this process can also process disputes a lot quicker with greater finality, predictability, and certainty for the outcome for businesses. The second is upgrading the existing WTO agreements, rules, and initiatives to create an open global market and it support economic inclusivity, primarily the MSME, to participate in the global value chain. I agree with my colleagues about the need for WTO to prioritize the upgrades of rules and disciplines on subsidies, criteria for S&DT, prevention of national security measures, abuse, improved discipline and transparency obligation on domestic regulations, and the upgrade of initiative on e-commerce to better facilitate trade through electronic means and to reap more maximum benefit of economic digitalization. On my part, I just want to re-emphasize the imperative for the WTO and multilateral trading system to empower more inclusiveness for business of all sizes, primarily the MSME, to be integrated into global supply and value chain. I think MSME, the backbones of our economies, have unfortunately not been able to benefit from their fair share of the global economy. We call the WTO to act on this interest by reducing the non-tariff measures, fostering homogeneity of standard, improve the global trade facilitation through digital means, as well as financing for MSME to trade globally. The third is to improve collaboration and cooperation functions of the WTO to address trade-related aspects of future crises. Now, if we look back at the past 1.5 years, we hope we can learn that the challenges in the global supply chain could be prevented in the future. It will require economies to also collaborate and cooperate with one another on their crisis prevention measure so that lockdown may not abruptly disrupt the ease of trade, primarily on goods that are needed to overcome the crisis. Also, scarcity on essential goods to overcome the pandemic, from PPE to vaccine, could also be prevented if countries were working together to communicate better on their production capacity, supply and demand, so that essential goods to overcome the pandemic could immediately be produced and distributed to those in need. we think that the WTO should play a crucial role in orchestrating and this whole collaboration and cooperation if they are trade-related aspect in the future crisis mitigation. Representing the voice of developing countries' businesses, I also want to bring to your attention the reform to the WTO and the multilateral trading system in general should be mindful of the development gap between the developed and developing countries. Yes, definitely we need to be ambitious in reforming the WTO to meet the 21st century economic complexity. However, businesses in developing countries need extra assistance and empowerment from the WTO to enjoy the fair and the same level of benefit from WTO rules, disciplines, and initiatives. In e-commerce, for example, businesses in developing countries are challenged by digital infrastructure scarcity and poor digital literacy to benefit from e-commerce. Thus, the WTO initiative and discipline on e-commerce will not be fair and meaningful for developing countries without aspects that level up the playing field for business in developing economy, namely facilitation to digital infrastructure development and improve digital literacy. The same also goes for trade and environmental sustainability measures, whereby we also found that proposed trade measures to environmental sustainability like carbon leakage or circular economy may end up also challenging businesses in developing countries to trade and to fast forward our own transition to carbon neutral economy. Thus, prudence and balance, I think the key word here is balance, empowerment are essential to the reform multilateral trading system. Finally, I also would like to convey that we understand the complexity that you are facing in the MC12. It may be a very difficult also to solve all the problem agenda in one conference. Thus, we would like to assure you, Dr. Ngozi, that B20 Indonesia, as we'll be hosting next year, will continue to support your leadership and effort in reforming the WTO and the multilateral trading system. I'm looking forward to continue the good collaboration between the WTO and the B20 in the Indonesia presidency next year. I certainly hope to have more dialogue with you in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shinta. I'm sure that Indonesia B20 will greatly contribute to enhancing the WTO. Unfortunately, we don't have so much time, so if you don't mind, we go directly to the conclusion. So Dr. Ngozi, if you want to highlight our consideration. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Yes, indeed, we're running out of time, but these were really excellent comments from the panelists. And my task is made much, much easier because they've highlighted very much the same points, which I think the membership of the WTO will appreciate. First, let me commend you for your strong voice today, for speaking out, for pointing out how important the WTO is to business and to you, and being clear what you want us to do. The message on the disputes on reform of the WTO functions, the notification and monitoring function, and transparency, the negotiations function, and of course the dispute settlement function. We heard you loud and clear, and I hope that our membership is also listening to how important this is for business. I want to again thank you for the accent on inclusivity. All of you mentioned the need for inclusion, for looking at the place of developing countries as we do negotiations and you know, the making negotiations development oriented, special and differential treatment. That has been noted. Your point on competitive neutrality, the need to look at the SCM agreement is also noted, and your accent on the fisheries negotiations could not be more appreciated. I think this is one area where the membership really needs to make a very strong effort for all the reasons you said about what type of signal it sends about multilateral negotiations. I think your comments show that, look, we would all like multilateralism to be strong, the level playing field, the stability that the rules of the WTO present, and for multilateral agreements, for multilateral trade. This is key. And I, again, hope our membership is listening to how important this is. I think they share the same view, but notwithstanding that, you've also pointed out that plurilaterals can address certain types of agreements so that the two side by side, and you noted the domestic services regulation agreement, which is moving in a good direction. Your accent on the pandemic, which is topical now, and very much one where the WTO has been able to play a strong role, again, is well noted. And what I particularly took away is the accent on not just what can be done, the solutions for now, but also positioning for the future is very important. And then, you know, some of the very interesting and new areas that you talked about, digital. It's not really new, but it's exciting. Maybe that's why I keep the accent on digital, the platform it provides for micro, medium, and small enterprises, and the need to really pay attention to the rules that could underpin e-commerce and digital trade has been well noted. Trade and environment, environmental and sustainability issues that you also raised, including the accent on carbon pricing issues, which we have to pay attention to. The circular economy, I'm happy to say that members are holding structured discussions on a number of these areas, which is very exciting, including plastics and what could be done with environmental goods and services to give incentives for the net zero environment. So these are all very fundamental, both areas that you know, we've been working on now for a long time, but also new areas where we need to move. One must not forget agriculture and the importance of that as well. So I think you've raised all the key issues. You put on the table what is meaningful for us to pay attention to. And I really look forward to our working with the B20 and with the business community on all these issues. So let me end by saying that it's not, you're going to have to be part and parcel of these reforms. So it's not just for the WTO membership to do this, but you are part of us. And I hope that we can work hand in hand to be able to tackle each and every one of these problems. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's closed.
Okay, thank you very much. The session is closed.
Thank you.